Drew McIntyre working an unsanctioned match in a stadium environment is always a risk-reward calculation because the moment you remove traditional structure, you're leaning entirely on instinct, timing, and credibility. And in my view, what made this WrestleMania 42 encounter against Jacob Fatu compelling wasn't just the violence. It was how both men manipulated packing within chaos. We're talking about a match that clocked in roughly around the mid-card feature range, but functioned like a co-main. Welcome back Wrestling News WWE. Event in terms of audience investment. Crowd heat wasn't just reactive, it was sustained. That matters because unsanctioned matches often burn hot early and die once the weapon spots become repetitive. This didn't fall into that trap. The opening exchange told you everything about the philosophy behind the booking. No collar and elbow tie-up, no feeling out process, straight into a brawl. That's correct ring psychology. These two had an established issue and the lack of a referee's authority in kayfabe justified the immediate escalation. Drew taking early control by driving Fatu's head into the steel wasn't just a spot. It established hierarchy. It told the audience, this is still McIntyre's domain. And for about the first third of the match, Drew worked like a ring general who understood spatial dominance. He dictated where the fight happened inside, outside, apron, barricade. That's high ring awareness. When he followed up with the dive after Fatu rolled out, it wasn't a throwaway high spot, it was a transition spot designed to keep momentum continuous. No dead air, no reset. Now where it gets interesting is the chair shot and the moonsault sequence. That near fall wasn't just about shock value, it was about altering the rhythm. Drew had been working methodical offense, then suddenly inserted a burst of unpredictability. That's how you prevent the crowd from settling into a pattern. But the real standout sequence for me, and this is where I think McIntyre elevated the match beyond expectation, was the wrench spot leading into the double chair powerbomb. That's controlled brutality. There's a difference between reckless weapon use and deliberate escalation. The wrench to the head wasn't spammed, it was timed and setting up the chairs facing each other. That's visual storytelling. The audience knows what's coming before it happens, and that anticipation generates heat. That power bomb through the chairs should have been the finish in a standard hardcore match, and the fact that it wasn't tells you. The booking philosophy. This wasn't about a quick payoff, it was about endurance. Jacob Fatu's comeback is where the match subtly shifts gears. Up until that point, Drew was the aggressor, the technician within chaos, but Fatu didn't just take over. He absorbed punishment and then flipped the intensity. His offense wasn't cleaner, it was heavier, more explosive, less precise. That contrast matters, it creates texture. The toolbox spot is a perfect example of layered storytelling. It's not just another weapon, it's symbolic escalation. You're moving from improvised violence to something that feels premeditated. And when Drew counters that moment with a claymore kick, you get one of the best near falls of the match. Not because of the move itself, but because of timing. The audience believed that was the finish. Let's talk about that claymore for a second. McIntyre's strike-based offense has always been one of his strongest assets, but in this match, he used it sparingly. That's discipline. When you overuse your finisher in a match like this, it loses impact. Here it felt like a last-ditch attempt to regain control. Now the table sequence on the outside is where both guys showed elite-level improvisation. Fash setting Drew up on the table and climbing to the top rope is classic high-risk storytelling. But Drew interrupting that moment with a chair shot flips the expectation. That's the kind of micro-adjustment that separates good workers from great ones. It's not about the spot, it's about when you choose to break it. Sending Fatu through the table at ringside should have been Drew's closing stretch. And in a vacuum, you could argue that this was his strongest sequence in the entire match. But here's where I think the booking becomes divisive. Fatu returns to the ring, eats the toolbox shot, lands the moonsault through the table, and gets the win. Now from a pure match structure standpoint, the finish works. It completes Fatu's comeback arc. He absorbs everything, survives the biggest spots, and then capitalizes with a decisive high-impact move. That's clean storytelling. But from a broader booking perspective, this is where the conversation gets complicated. In my view, yes, but not necessarily in terms of match quality. He delivered there. The issue is opportunity cost. When you're operating at that level of consistency, you should be in matches that directly influence the title picture. Instead, he was in a feud that, while intense and well executed, existed parallel to the main narrative. Now let's talk forward-looking analysis because that's where this gets interesting. If we're projecting the next 3 months, Drew McIntyre is at a crossroads. A loss like this doesn't bury him, but it does require recalibration. The logical path is a redemption arc, either through a high-profile rivalry or a re-entry into the championship scene. Betting odds for the next premium live event, assuming a standard post-Mania cycle, would likely place McIntyre as a top contender in any multi-man match scenario. He's still protected in terms of presentation even in defeat. Jacob Fatu, on the other hand, exits this match with massive upside. A win in an unsanctioned match at WrestleMania carries weight. If the booking remains consistent, he's positioned as a legitimate threat moving forward. The key will be sustainability. It's one thing to have a breakout performance. It's another to maintain that level across multiple programs. Coming back to Drew though, the bigger issue isn't whether he should have gotten better. It's whether the company fully capitalized on what he brings to the table. Because when you watch this match closely, you're not seeing someone who's plateaued. You're seeing a performer who understands timing, structure, and audience psychology at a very high level. The mid-match gear shifts the selective use of high-impact defense, the ability to control packing in a no-rules environment. That's not average work, that's top craftsmanship. And in a WrestleMania card where spectacle often overshadows substance, this match managed to deliver both. So, if we're being precise about it, Drew McIntyre didn't underperform, he over-delivered relative to his position on the card. And that's why this conversation even exists, because when someone performs at that level and still feels like an afterthought in the broader narrative, it raises questions not about the wrestler but about the booking logic surrounding him. The end of the day, this match will age well. It has the kind of controlled chaos and physical storytelling that holds up on rewatch, but whether it becomes a defining moment for either man depends entirely on what comes next. And if the company doesn't follow up correctly, then this won't be remembered as a launchpad.